Today on the Transplant Helper, I'm going to answer the question for you. Can a transplant recipient actually donate their organs at some point in their life, or maybe even potentially at the end of their life? Stay tuned.
Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle. This is a question I've received a number of times. I've actually answered it, I don't know how many dozen times through the years. However, this is the first time I've ever sat down and made a video answering the question, can a transplant recipient donate their organs at some point in their life, or maybe after their life? And the answer to that is maybe. And it really depends on the perspective, who you're asking, that sort of thing. Basically, if you go in and ask your transplant team that question tomorrow, you may receive a yes, you may receive a no, you might receive a maybe, you might receive a we'd have to think about it, or we'd have to do some research, some digging. But the real answer to that question is, if it is at the time of death, it is probably going to eventually be a resounding yes. And I say eventually be that because not every transplant center is willing to do that at this point. As a matter of fact, there are several transplant centers across the country who have actually done transplants from former transplant recipients themselves, at least passed those organs on again and again. And that basically comes down to a few, but one who stands out, who actually wrote an article concerning such, happens to be UCLA. They have actually transplanted on a couple of occasions, at least one that was noted in a news article I read. They've actually transplanted several patients that have been recipients themselves. For example, taking a kidney from one person who was a one-time recipient who was deceased, passed from this life, and then in turn giving that kidney to another person and even extending that life even farther. So continuing to pass those organs on in that way. Now, that is the case at the time of death, but again, that's not universally accepted. Some transplant centers simply don't do that, or they may not be willing to try that. But like I've told my family before, I'm an organ donor. I'll continue to remain an organ donor all my life. And at the time of death, hopefully maybe that won't be in the near future, but whenever that is, maybe technology or, just the advancements in research and such would have made that even more possible and more likely or more universally across the board. So it doesn't hurt to remain an organ donor. It doesn't hurt to, to make that offer at the time of death, that sort of thing. Now, I think the reason that question gets answered any other way than that, again, based on per center, may or may not be willing to do that. But I think most commonly the reason people immediately answer that question by saying, no, it's not possible, is maybe because they've asked questions about becoming living donors. I've seen many people become living donors concerning kidneys and liver and that sort of thing. And I've thought many a times myself that I would really like to do that. That would be my way on this side of life of, giving life to someone else. Now, in general, if you ask that question, can I donate an organ if I'm the living donor, then that's when the answer might, generally speaking, be no. And that's not because it's impossible or that there's anything going to be wrong with your kidney or a part of your liver or whatever. It's just going to come down to the fact that it's not advisable. It's not advisable that if you've been through one failure, for me it's a heart failure, that I would in turn try to donate a kidney at some point, because there's just damage done throughout the years to the kidneys and to the liver and through all the organs. Really, there's a level of damage done throughout the years to those organs, and that doesn't make those organs unviable for someone else. It just simply means that I don't need to get into a position where I get into trouble myself. Say, for example, I've been through heart failure, grew up a congenital patient, was in heart failure officially for about 10 years, eventually was listed, waited about a year on transplant, got that. Well, I've been taking medications for the past 8 years now that have done a little damage to my kidneys and to my liver, and that's pretty much unavoidable. Well, say, for example, I went and donated my right kidney to someone, this year. At some point down the road, I might start having more trouble, more issues with my left kidney. And then that would put me in a position of needing an organ. And so because of that, the living donor is not generally advisable. And therefore, most teams are going to give that a flat no right quick. But the deceased donor, That's where the mixed reviews come in, and that's where it is completely possible and probably going to be more and more likely, again, more universal as the years go by, as technologies change. But places like UCLA and several other centers around the country not only have done that, but will be continuing to do that, and they're kind of paving the way for others to follow suit. So I think if you want to answer the question universally, you might get a yes, no, or a maybe. If you want to answer that about the deceased donor, you're probably going to get that yes eventually, and the key word is eventually. But if you want to ask that about a living donor, probably not, just because it's not advisable. I think if I was in a position where a family member needed that, I'd probably be fighting tooth and nail, to try to make that happen as a living donor. But, at the same time, my doctors, I'm sure, wouldn't advise that, just based on the potential that I might be putting myself at risk or in trouble at some point. But I still think it's worth it. It is always worth it to do good to fellow man and to do good for mankind. And even if that is through organ donation, it's certainly admirable and it's certainly appreciated. And I'm certainly, I'm a recipient of such a great example that was set forth. So thank you for the question. I saw this actual question that's come up again tonight on the Heart Transplant USA support group, or whatever it's called. I'll put it up here on the screen. One of the great groups you can be a part of, but I saw it come up tonight. It just kind of reminded me that I hadn't sat down to do this type of video before. But thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've asked this question of your center, what have they said about it? I think eventually they're all going to say yes, but right now, what are they saying about it? If you've asked, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear you share that information below the video. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, stay stronger, friends.